Welcome into Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Also, you can find us on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. That's every day, Monday through Friday now, from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. on the East Coast, 7 to 8 on the West Coast. Also, check out 5reasonsports.com. Make sure you check it out for all of your free South Florida content. You don't go there and then all of a sudden you get hit by a paywall and have to decide, do I want to spring for the $3 a month? No, everything there is free. All of our articles, all of our columns, all of our podcasts. That includes 3 Yards Per Carry, 5 Rings Canes, and the others. You can also find all the old episodes of Five on the Floor by clicking through there. And our YouTube channel with several new shows, including 90 Minutes Strong on soccer and Loaded Bases on baseball. And you can also find all of our merchandise, our Tua shirts, our Heat shirts, our 5 Reasons shirts, and much, much more. We're going to be releasing a summer line here over the next couple of weeks. We're also introducing a bunch of new sponsors to the 5 Reasons Sports Network. I can tell you this is the only sponsor where my co-hosts have been giving me a hard time because they want the beer. So today, after I picked up my daughter, I actually had to go out to Beer Bar to make sure that I dropped some beer with Alf because it's great beer. It's from Biscayne Bay Brewing, the official craft beer of Inter Miami, the Miami Marlins, and yes, 5 Reasons Sports Network. This is South Florida's actual independent brewery. Biscayne Bay is owned by local guys who employ people in this community, just like we do, to make their beer right here in South Florida. These guys are committed to the community and support 5 Reasons Sports, so we at 5 Reasons can keep bringing you all the local sports content that you can handle. If you care about supporting local business and drinking amazing beer, grab their stuff. That's Marlins Lager, Miami Pale Ale, or the Tropical Bay IPA, which I stuffed in my cargo shorts yesterday. Yes, Alf, I was wearing cargo shorts at all major retailers throughout South Florida. It's the only beer that we're going to be drinking at 5 Reasons Sports. This is an edict from now on. We drink no other beer. We just drink from Biscayne Bay Brewing. Check out the website, and they're going to have a location where when everything passes, hopefully at some point soon, we're going to start having those watch parties where, we're on a little bit of a streak right now with the Miami Heat. All right, now today's episode is a special one, and we're going to let it run completely from beginning to end, and then we're going to update you on some stuff with the Miami Heat that happened on this Wednesday. But first, Mark Jones.
Welcome to 5 on the Floor, a Miami Heat and NBA podcast from Ethan Skolnick with Alphonse Sidney, a.k.a. Alf954. Brought to you by the 5 Reasons Sports Network.
All right, welcome back to 5 on the Floor. And as mentioned earlier, we've got a special guest today on this episode. Of course, people in Miami know him, but people all over the country and also very well known in the country above us as well. Mark Jones joins us today on 5 on the Floor. And we're going to get into a whole bunch of stuff with you, Mark. Obviously, we're going to talk NBA. I got to throw in some Hurricanes while we've got an opportunity because my co-host.
Sure.
My co-host here, Alphonse, is a frustrated Canes fan. So we'll talk about that as well. But I just want to start here, and then I want to get into some background. But for people who just see you on ABC, ESPN now and kind of forget some of the Miami ties, and obviously you live down here, can you talk about sort of your history with Miami?
Yeah, always loved the city and have spent most of my adult life down here, actually. After being born in Toronto, moved down here. My mom and dad always had a place down here, going back to the 80s and the mid-80s. And, I had done some studio shows with ESPN when I first started out the NBA Today show. And, right around like 95 or so, decided, I remember distinctly coming back into Connecticut during a snowstorm and couldn't get my car in the driveway and a foot of snow. And I said, you know what? I'm done. I'm done. I moved to Miami.
That'll do it.
Yeah, man. Yeah, that was it, man. And moved down here full time right around then, around 95, 96, and have been here ever since. And just love the city, man. I mean, it's a great place to be. It's diverse. It's got tremendous weather. The sports down here are great, despite what some of the reputation nationally might be in terms of perceived apathy. Worked with the Miami Heat beginning in the late 90s at WAMI Channel 69 at the time, right down there on Lincoln Road, man. And that was some of the most fun time I've ever had in television, just because, we did the Heat pregame, postgame shows. And I was in the studio there doing that sometimes on site of the arena. And like, I've never worked, guys, in a place like Miami where the studio was like a fishbowl down there. I don't know if you guys remember it.
I do.
It's a Starbucks now, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was like a huge fishbowl. And like, we would be getting ready for that nightly sportscast and see like athletes walk by because it's Miami, right? And, we'd say, oh, shoot, there's Barry Sanders. Hey, Barry, you want to come inside and do a quick interview with us? Like, it was such a great location to have access to sports people, because people were coming down here to hang out, and you would easily bump into people. And I had some of my best, most famous gets just by guys walking through Lincoln Road and in and around South Beach. So, my ties go pretty deep to the city, going back to then, and been here, just a little under 30 years. Consider myself a South Floridian. It's been great to my wife and my kids. My kids were all, they all grew up here, and played high school basketball, and ran track and cross country. And two of them are off to college. My last one's leaving South Florida and going out to San Jose State next year to play on the women's basketball team on scholarship. So, man, this city, I love what this city offers. I love being a part of, Dayton, Broward County. I love being considered part of this Looney Tunes world we have down here in South Florida. And, it's part of the charm, man. It really is. And there's no other place I'd rather be, to be honest with you.
Well, to that point, I feel like in the national media landscape, there are very few voices who kind of take up for this place. Like you mentioned it, there is a reputation here that the fans arrive late, that they don't care that much, that everybody's transient, and all of that kind of stuff. I feel like there's like, I don't know, a handful of voices. Dan, Jax, Sedano now. But not a lot. Like right, you're on that list. Like I feel like there's a certain comfort, like particularly when you have a Heat game or have a Hurricanes game, that like the local team is going to be treated fairly. Is that a fair thing to say, Alf?
Yeah, and you know what? And
It definitely is, yeah. And also because when during the Open and when you hear shout outs to Overtown and Carol City and things and stuff like that, you're in for a good game that night.
Yeah, man. I mean, like I really try and put on for my city here, especially during Heat and Hurricane games, because I kind of feel like, you intimated it, Ethan, like nationally, guys don't really know about this place. Like they come down here, they'll go to Prime 112, or they'll go to a club and, get crooked, get twisted for a night. And then, hey, that's Miami. That's their Miami experience. And they think, everybody else, everyone that lives down here is from somewhere else. I hear the criticisms of Miami crowds, and I think about, being a season ticket holder for the Miami Heat. And, I was an original season ticket holder going back to even when my mom and dad, I told you, had a place down here in the 80s. When the Heat first came into existence, I was like the third row up in the upper deck, just above the railing, and knew some of the people there. And then when I moved when we moved to the new arena, American Airlines Arena, right there, section 101, row 15, seats 1 and 2. My wife and I had season tickets there for a long time, and we got to know every person in our section almost personally, to the point where they saw our kids grow up. So when I hear people talk about Miami fans, oh, they don't show up on time and they don't show up to games and they give their tickets away, that's garbage. It's garbage, because I know for a fact that I know my neighbors at the games, and we speak with them, and I've seen their families' kids grow up, and it's it's much more communal and community than the national media gives it credit for. And when I do University of Miami Hurricane football games, it's kind of funny to hear people talk about Miami guys and Miami this, Miami that. I want to tell them, man, you don't know jack about Miami. I really enjoy talking about the background of some of these football players, especially when it comes to University of Miami, the homebred ones in particular, the guys that grew up in Overtown or Liberty City, working at local car washes or going to Antioch Missionary Baptist Church on Sundays in Carroll City. I'm at the barbershop a lot with these kids and their parents and their coaches, and I know them, so I enjoy telling those stories, and I enjoy telling them accurately, and I feel personally invested in it from a media standpoint to get the story right and not just make it your basic kind of stereotypical story that you might hear spit out lazily by someone from the national media who's doing the game.
Well, I can tell you, Mark, you're super popular on Heat Twitter. I'm very involved in Heat Twitter, probably too much. If you're familiar with Heat Twitter, it's kind of a cesspool at times, but you're one of the few guys that's actually universally loved. And we on Heat Twitter don't love a lot of people. What about your engagement on Twitter? How has that been with Heat fans, Canes fans? Because almost all of what I've seen is positive. Social media wise, how do Heat fans, South Florida fans treat you?
They're great, man. They're great to me on the Heat side. It's I feel some of the love when I've done a game or two, and I'm able to everyone says we're here on South Beach at American Airlines Arena. No, we're not. We're at the corner of 8th Street and Biscayne Boulevard, bro.
Thank you. Listen, when the Heat games are pretty bad, but when you get B-roll of South Beach during a Dolphins game,
Arcade's game,
yeah, I'll never understand that one. Yeah. Next, the Florida Panthers are going to be playing on South Beach. Why?
Really, that's 20 miles away, and people think it's right on the beach or right next door. I enjoy vibing back and forth on Heat Twitter. Regardless of what some of the rest of the country thinks, I think Heat basketball fans, listen, I've covered the league for almost 30 years. Heat basketball fans are as passionate as any of the basketball fans out there. If you look at some of the national media outlet ratings for TV during playoffs and NBA All-Star games and All-Star weekends, the Miami market historically ranks amongst the top 10 guys. So that tells you that there's a passionate fan base down here. And I give credit and love to the Miami Heat, nation out there for being not just Heat fans, but just great NBA fans in particular. And I love it that they, we stick up for our own. I think it was interesting watching the Michael Jordan, the decision special the other day, because it was the 10-year anniversary of LeBron coming down here
today.
It was amazing to see the amount of national hate that LeBron took. I feel like we were the only ones down here in Dade County and Broward County that were happy about LeBron. And I wasn't even mad at LeBron. He just changed the game, man. He changed the game with what he did in coming to Miami, and nothing else really mattered to me.
Yeah, that was going to be the next place I was going to go. So let's go there, because today is the 10-year anniversary as we're recording this, July 8th, 2010. I put a question up on 5 Reasons Sports Twitter today. What were you doing when Miami made the world so mad? And I think that's one of the things that'll be remembered. And what I wanted to ask you, Mark, was the other thing that I threw out there today is, in the post-Jordan era, the Golden State Warriors had the best team, I believe. Right. The San Antonio Spurs have had the most consistent, greatness. But the Miami Heat had the most important team, because in my view, Mark, they were the first super team, and because the Celtics 2008 was pre-Twitter. in terms of when everybody got on it. The Miami Heat, the big three Miami Heat, or as Udonis likes to call it, the big three and the little 12, those teams changed, in my view, not just basketball, but sports media. In some ways, society. When you think about the hoodies for Trayvon, you think about the Harlem Shake. You think about all of the gates that they had, whether it was Crygate or Bumpgate or any of those other things. To me, they're the most important NBA team post Jordan. Would you agree with that? And do you think they'll ever get credit for that?
Yeah, that's a great perspective and reference. I would agree with that wholeheartedly, Ethan. When you think about every move they made, let me go back a little bit. When LeBron decided to come here, it was a seismic shift in not just the roster, because he was a one-man roster, but teaming up with Dwayne and Chris Bosh, but the method in which he did it. I think a lot of the criticism that he received by going on television, by going on ESPN, by ESPN giving him the time to make the announcement, I don't understand where and why that criticism, to this day, to this moment as I speak to you guys, I don't know where it came from. I don't think it was justified. If you knew that as ESPN, a television network, would get huge viewership, it turned out to be 10 million people. By giving LeBron the airtime to make his announcement, why wouldn't you do that? So boom, that's a plus for ESPN. It's a plus for the viewer because we got a chance to see it. And it was a plus for LeBron because he got to make his announcement in front of the country and donate a couple of $1 million to the Boys and Girls Club of America in the process. So anybody who criticized that, to me, I think is telling on themselves a little bit in terms of maybe a little too much of a traditionalist. Perhaps there was an old boys network that was upset, that didn't like it. And they just had to deal with it. I think it was amazing for me to see an athlete of that magnitude flex his agency and his power. And that really did, as you said, Ethan, that changed the way that business was forever done in the NBA right up to this moment, where we've seen other players do the same thing. We've seen Durant do that with Golden State. We've seen, and him jump teams. We've seen, Kawhi Leonard tell management with the Clippers this past summer, hey, I like your squad, but you need to go get Paul George and we can make this happen. So in that respect, yeah, it was a paradigm shift in the way of doing business, player empowerment in the NBA, and LeBron really flexing his muscles. And that team was so much fun, man. I think about, you mentioned the video, the Harlem Shake. You think about the social statements they make. And to me, that's really where LeBron, and the convergence with the Miami Heat organization, he took advantage of Miami Heat culture and really took that blueprint and made it what it is right now. And, to do what he did in terms of social justice, he really found his voice down here in Miami alongside Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh. And to win 2 championships, go to the finals 4 straight years down here, it will go down as one of the, I think, top 5 basketball eras in NBA history, that 2010 to 2014.
We're definitely going to transition with you here to social justice, and I want to talk about that as the NBA enters the bubble. But the one thing I wanted to follow with you on, because I do agree with you that a lot of it was an old boys network that was resistant to player empowerment. I think that was 90% of it. I also think the other 10% was what we talked about early in this episode, which is that I just don't think a lot of people around the country like Miami. I think that there was a jealousy of Miami in general that still exists. But I also think, and you occupy a little bit of this space because you work for ESPN, which obviously is based in the Northeast and New England.
Sure.
And also now has kind of moved a lot of its NBA resources out to Los Angeles. Miami kind of has always, in my view, like ESPN has sort of viewed it as like a foreign country. Like, it's this Yankee Red Sox bias that exists and all that kind of stuff. And it was like,
yeah, they play like 40 times a year, don't they? Every game on ESPN.
Every game on ESPN, right?
Well, Ethan, it's not just ESPN; it's the rest of the country views Miami as a foreign country. So I think that plays a little bit into it. And like you're saying with traditionalists, if he went to New York, there wouldn't be. I mean, there'd be 75% less vitriol. Yeah. Or if he went to Chicago, a more traditional quote unquote NBA city, and not as Lebertard calls it, the Banana Republic of Miami.
Right. Yeah, I think it definitely had something to do with the desired destination for LeBron. And listen, like I said, we've got sun, we've got beach. There is a national perception of Miami. I always tell my coworkers when they come down here, like I had 2 college football games here this year, and I brought Dusty Dvorak and Olivia Decker, our analyst and sideline reporter, and our producer director. I had the whole crew over at my house here for dinner up here in Weston. And I'm like, hey guys, isn't it cool to see that, like, you see that school over there? Like, we have schools here. we have like neighborhoods here. We have parks here. It's not just a whole bunch of nightclubs and glitz and glamour down here in South Florida. So yeah, that's part of it. It's part of the national reception. Nobody sees us living like squares out here in the suburbs. So that's always going to be part of the issue with Miami, that we're perceived in a certain light. And I think if you went to New York or Chicago, or if LeBron had gone any of those other places, it would have been different. It really would. But I love the fact, I love the fact that Miami sports fans, and especially, Heat fans in general, I think we have just a little bit of a chip on our shoulder that keeps everybody else honest, Yeah.
Well, speaking of the Heat right now, we're talking about the past, and we love to reminisce on those big 3 years. But the Heat have a pretty good team right now with Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, and a lot of these young guys, undrafted guys, unheralded guys. And I feel like Heat fans down here feel really, really good going into this, truncated playoff situation. And I know nationally, the Heat aren't getting as much respect, and which is nothing new. I mean, they're positioned below the 76ers in ESPN's power rankings when the Sixers are a 6 seed and were, basically a mess most of the season. How do you feel about the Heat's chances in this playoff going in? And, where do you see their ceiling this season?
Well, they're 41-24 going into the bubble. They're games back of the Celtics in the loss column, 2 games ahead of the Pacers and the Sixers in the loss column. I think it might be a little unrealistic at this point for them in the 8 regular season games that are left to play, and them having the most difficult schedule in the bubble, which really works to their detriment, because they had one of the easiest schedules prior to going into the bubble down the stretch. I don't think they're going to catch Toronto, but they have a decent shot at catching Boston. Here's my take on Miami. I think because of all you're going to see soft tissue injuries. You're going to see guys still trying to struggle and get their rhythm. I think the fact that Miami historically is one of the best conditioned teams, one of the hardest working teams, part of the Heat culture, I think that they have tremendous depth. That depth is going to pay off for them coming into the Orlando situation. And, when you've got great shooting, when you've got good defensive culture like they do, they're still top 10 in defensive efficiency. You're always going to have a chance. I think there's nothing but upside for Miami because even though they're 41-24 going in, the one guy that I haven't mentioned yet, Jimmy Butler, still hasn't played his best basketball in terms of shooting and scoring. And I know he spent a lot of time out in San Diego during the break, during the last 3.5 months. I know he's been getting great work in with his personal trainer, his skills trainer, Stan Remy. So Jimmy should be ready to go. He hasn't shot well on 3-point shooting so far this year. I think he's in the mid to low 20s, but that can only get better. And I think as he gets closer to his ceiling, Miami's game will raise up that much more too. So I think Miami's got as good a shot as anybody coming out of the Eastern Conference. Milwaukee is the dominant team in the East, but at 53-12, but they lose a tremendous home court advantage because we're all neutral court games now. And, Giannis is still the best player, I think, in the Eastern Conference, second best player in the game. But I think Miami overall, Miami's beaten them twice so far this year. They're 2-0 against Milwaukee. So the Heat are as good as anybody right now going in.
See, I think I agree with much of what you're saying, and a lot of it we've talked about it on the pod. You talk about depth. You talk about the word that I know Alf wants me to use more, culture. You talk about the mix that they have of experience.
Mark agrees with me on the culture thing.
Yeah, I know. I agree they have a culture. I just didn't like it as a catchphrase. I know Heat fans are all over me about that. But to me, culture, I'll say it again real quick, okay? To me, culture matters when you have Jimmy Butlers and Bam Adebayos. It doesn't matter as much when you have Rodney Magruder. That's all I'm saying, okay? And I think you and I agree on that. But
yeah, you need a star piece to put in there. You're right. I would agree.
Yeah, I mean, culture can get guys to a certain point, okay? But it's to me, it was invented by the organization because they didn't have stars anymore, so they were trying to create a new identity. Now it matters, in my view. But they have a mix. To me, if you look at the rosters in the Eastern Conference, they have the best mix of vets and young legs, and I think both are going to matter. The young legs, as you know, Mark, NBA players always talk about the veteran guys, the guys in their 30s, say it usually takes them about a month into the season before they really feel right. Like they use that usually November is kind of it's like an additional training camp for them. And so I think the young guys are going to get up to speed quicker, and the Heat have, 6 players, 26 or under in the rotation, but they also have Udonis Haslem, Jimmy Butler, Goran Dragic, and Andre Iguodala. Who I think are sort of the perfect blend of mentors who like each other, which is the other thing. So I think they have a really good mix for this. One more before we get into the NBA at large.
Sure.
Your interaction with Erik Spoelstra through the years, and in this situation as a coach where you have guys who some are going to come back in great shape, some, even though you worked with them on Zoom and all that, are not going to come back as good shape, and he also has 11 or 12 players to work with. How do you think Spo navigates this?
You know what I think? We were just talking about the culture a little bit. He's got a little bit of a head start and some help via that. I just have I had a conversation with Mike D'Antoni about 6 weeks ago, and he said something very insightful. He said, Mark, the guys that get their work in during the year and are in great shape, you'll never have to worry about them during this pandemic being in shape and staying in shape. The guys that you normally would worry about getting their work in and staying in shape during the year are the guys that you still have to worry about now during the pandemic. So I think that's the kind of global approach that Spoelstra is probably using to navigate this. I think that, Miami's got their guys. They've got, Bill Ferren and his son and on the athletic training staff that are making sure that guys get their work in. I think the mere fact that you're part of the organization gives you a measure of expectation already. I don't think that anyone's going to come back in what you would call bad shape. I think there might be rust. But I think otherwise, guys have been getting their work in before they close the practice facility. That's a tricky deal. In terms of expecting everyone to come back and be ready right away. I think there's a difference between having your cardio, having not run 17s for a while and suicides, and having that component versus being ready skill-wise. And I think when they get up to Orlando and go through their paces and get in their scrimmages, their 3 scrimmages against opposing teams, I think they'll come out on the positive side of things.
All right, so we're getting into the Orlando and what's going on with Orlando and the bubble. And as a resident of South Florida, you know that we're not doing the best when it comes to COVID-19 and the coronavirus, to say the very least. How do we're seeing more and more guys. Ethan reported this morning or yesterday that DJJ has cleared protocols and he's back with the team, but we know there have been other positive tests at the Miami Heat. There's positive tests all over the league. Do you feel that it's responsible for the league to go forward? And I mean, are you going to be in Orlando? Do you feel safe? You know, this.
Yeah.
Is this the right thing to do at the right time?
Man, here's the thing. Guys, will someone please teach our governor to put a mask on? I've seen that same clip on the news like 84 times of him struggling to put the mask on. Like, Ron DeSantis, let me show you how to put a mask on.
Mark, I'm surprised he can get dressed in the morning. So
I mean, isn't that symbolic of our current political situation?
Yeah,
I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, the clip, I put this on the other day. I mean, the clip of him like spreading his arms out, you know, how you like me now to the media was exactly the same expression that Trae Young had before the Heat went on a 22-0 run against the Hawks earlier this season. COVID's got on a bigger run than the Heat did, though. It's rough. But to Alf's point, like, I mean, I think, you know, there's this debate, and we do want to get into the social justice issues with you because, you know, we've really struggled on Five on the Floor to talk about basketball for a while because, you know, it feels at times it feels like the right thing to do when people need a diversion, and I understand where Adam Silver's coming from there. At the same time, we know this is mostly about money. And you know, it was one thing when you were dealing with COVID and trying to do that responsibly, but then of course you have a league which is predominantly black, and you have all these issues going on in the country, and it did make. I mean, Alf. I mean, you said it. You were times you didn't want to do this. You know, wouldn't want to do Five on the Floor because it doesn't feel right. I mean, for you in your situation, I mean, how do you process all of that?
Yeah, you know, I'm going to be in Orlando. I trust the NBA and their health and safety protocols because unlike the leaders in our state, in particular our governor, I know that the NBA believes in science. They believe in data and truthful data, and I trust them with me being up there and all of the athletes from the 22 teams and their staff that they're going through protocols. They're going to keep everybody as safe as you can. They recently did something similar, guys, in the German basketball league. They had fewer players, only about 250 players, but they were able to finish off their regular season in a similar type bubble circumstance, and they didn't have anything go sideways. So, you know, hopefully we have the same result with the NBA season in Disney, despite the fact that the COVID numbers are going through the roof. You know, they've divided things up into different tiers in terms of access. You know, tier 1 will be people that are pretty much on lockdown. Tier 2 are people that can be there but don't have direct contact with athletes and coaches and can't be on the floor and can come and go as they like, but still are going to be subjected to testing. I mean, come on, guys. Did you see those magic rings that they're wearing to predict temperature changes? I mean,
my daughter wants one, Mark.
Yeah, I know. Disney, they got all those cool gimmicks, man. You know,
she thinks it's gonna make Elsa appear. Like I showed it to her.
It looked like from one of those Frozen movies. But no, seriously, I know that a lot of this is financially motivated, and when I think about all that's going on in the world, you know, I understand why there was a movement amongst a significant portion of the players not to play. I get it. I don't think there's a wrong answer. or a right answer. I think if you don't feel like playing, that's cool. If you do feel like playing, that's cool too. And I love the fact that the NBA is such a forward-thinking and inclusive league, that Adam Silver and Michelle Roberts got their heads together with Players Association, and they're going to be able to make their statements about social justice in a league that is, 72, 75% Black. And it's something that needs to be said. And I don't understand, people who say, oh, why are you talking about Black Lives Matter? You're being divisive. I'm like, are you crazy? There's nothing divisive about Black players and Black people wanting police not to brutalize them. There's nothing political about that. That is a human issue, not a political issue. And I'll pass it back to you guys with that. I don't get people. And, for viewers that, I heard Michelle Roberts say this, the president of the Players Association, for viewers that are going to tune out because they feel like they're being beat over the head with statements about Black Lives Matter or social justice. Goodbye. Don't need you, I guess. If you object to equality that much, you're telling on yourselves.
I mean, we deal with that as a network. Believe me, Ethan has his views that he's not shy about on Twitter. And we have to, we tell people bye all the time. I have another podcast that's more pop culture politics. We've done live stream shows about these issues on the 5 Reasons feed. And people object, but at the end of the day, it's kind of hard to hear the truth sometimes.
Right.
And I think that's what's the most important thing. So you kind of got into already kind of what I wanted to talk to you about, where you have players from both sides of the issue, where some are saying that, it's not responsible to play at a time like this. And then you have other players that say, I want to use my platform. Where do you side on that issue, or is there even a side to take? Because that's kind of my take on it. There is no side. Every one of these young men should have the opportunity to express themselves the way they see fit, and they shouldn't be judged either way. Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think there's no wrong answer. Sometimes sometimes you may wake up in the morning and say, man, I'd love to go to that protest, or I'd love to sit in on that, Broward or Dade County Commission meeting and let my voice be heard on defunding the police by $1 million and make sure that $1 million goes towards affordable housing downtown in Liberty City or Overtown or in East Hollywood. That would require presence, and that's where a certain player in the league may not want to play because he wants to be present to see about the change. Or you may want to be on television and do your interviews with your media when you're in Orlando and talk about what you plan on doing for social justice and to make changes for the better in this country. So both ways are effective. Selfishly, as a basketball player, as a basketball fan, I would love to see everyone there in uniform playing, but I know that's not realistic, and I'm not going to frown on anybody or discredit anybody or disparage anybody if they choose to do it another way. So that's where I am on this. And, just one other thing too, guys, when I take heat as a Black sportscaster, as a Black play-by-play announcer all the time. I'll use the word, there's racists out there that hit me up on Twitter. And I can remember specifically doing it wasn't an NBA game, but it was LSU, Notre Dame, Music City Bowl game a few years ago, Rod Gilmore and I. And we were talking about the fact that, we had 2 starting African-American quarterbacks. And, LSU ended up coming back to win the game,
or Notre Dame came back to win the game. And I checked some of my mentions after, and I received one of the most vile, racist tweets I ever had in my life. I only have to laugh at it now because, the saying is, what doesn't kill you just makes you blacker, right? So the tweet was like, I should have figured that with 2 N quarterbacks and 2 N announcers in the booth that my team would lose LSU. And it was, just stuff like that. And, it's sometimes disheartening. I think I've blocked over 1,000 racists on my timeline over the last month. Again, let me give you another example of how it comes up with me and how issues which some people think are political really aren't. I was doing an Ole Miss football game, and I talked about the fact that, Ole Miss had history of, the integration history down there. I talked about how in the state it was hard for Black players and integration of football in the SEC. And, again, on social media afterwards, a lot of criticism. But if you're telling real stories about athletes and as it impacts African-American athletes, you're going to talk about race. And when people get defensive about that, I just don't understand why they get so mean-spirited. But then I guess it's a rhetorical question.
They're telling on themselves.
Yeah.
When they tell you to stick to sports because they don't want, like I said, the truth hurts.
Yeah, it does. It really does.
They want you to stick to sports because they want their escape, but they don't understand that for the players involved, the history of sports, race is completely intertwined into everything that we do. And we're just talking about sports here. We're not even talking about society as a whole. So for any of us to act like this stuff is not affecting what's happening on the field or has affected it in the past, and ignore those stories and those history, and that history is basically, it's just intellectually dishonest, and we're doing a disservice to the people who are listening and the people that are watching what we do.
Listen, guys, if I had a Milwaukee Bucks game earlier this year, it was in the wake of Sterling Brown turning down the $400,000 settlement, quote unquote, that the Milwaukee Police Department had offered him after they brutalized him for illegal parking in the middle of the night at a Walgreens or a drugstore. He was going inside to pick some things up, and they tased him. They had their foot on his ankle, and they brutalized him. And he turned down their offer. He's suing them. He's taking them to court. I talked about that during the Milwaukee Bucks game that I did. There's nothing political about that. Sterling Brown is part of that Milwaukee Bucks team. He's part of the rotation. For me to not mention that during the game is journalistic malpractice. Yep. It's not political. It's news. And it impacts.
If he fell down the stairs and got injured, you talk about it.
Yeah, it impacted the Milwaukee Bucks. I know it impacted the guys in the locker room because they're talking about it, and you bet that it was something of a big deal inside the walls of that locker room. So yeah, it's a story. It's not political.
Yeah, and I think as Alf says, what I found is whenever somebody tells me stick to sports, I only have one automatic block on Twitter and Instagram. That's
you too. Yeah.
That's it. It's an automatic block because it 99.9% of the time when somebody tells me stick to sports, I'll flip over to first thing. A lot of times it's people with no followers or they're bots, but when they're not, and I go over to their timeline, the stuff that they're tweeting out. They're not sticking to sports. I mean, no, I don't know what they do in their day jobs, but they're entitled to give their opinions, and their opinions are always on one side. And so I know why it is that somebody's telling me to stick to sports because they don't want to have a conversation on a particular topic because, as you guys say, they tell on themselves, and they don't want to be challenged because particularly people who have a racial bias, the worst thing in the world to tell them is they have a racial bias. They don't want to acknowledge that. And so I've felt as a network that although I know we're going to anger some people, we're going to try to tell what we believe to be the truth. It doesn't mean that we don't have divergent views inside the network, but
sure.
But there are certain things to me that are moral. They're not they're not political. And I think some of what you guys are addressing. I want to get back to one basketball thing. You've been really generous with your time, Mark.
Yeah.
But the other question about all of this, when you're talking about COVID, you're talking about social justice, you're talking about a bubble, players being away for 3 months potentially from their families, all these things that are going on, the question has been raised, should there be an asterisk on whoever wins this thing if it gets to the end? What is your perspective on that?
I think it's going to be a different season. But because of the degree of difficulty, because of the sacrifice, I think it would be disingenuous to put an asterisk beside it. People will know historically that it was not abbreviated, but a different season, a unique season. But I wouldn't want to discount a team winning the championship because of the personal sacrifice that it takes to do it. You heard Giannis say it the other day. I don't know if he said winning this championship is going to be the hardest thing that they'll ever do if they get it done because of the circumstances. Guys won't get to see their families until after the first round of the playoffs. I think when you hear the NBA Players Association talk about mental health being one of the key issues during this next stretch, that really is a euphemism for it's going to be hard on these guys between the ears as much as it is physically, missing their families and such. And because of all that it's going to take, I don't think that you put an asterisk beside it. I think, we had strike shortened seasons. Champions are champions. Everyone's given the quote unquote fair opportunity to do the same thing. So, outside of a couple tweaks in the schedule, I don't think it would be fair to look at a champion and say, yeah, but this and yeah, but that.
So when we have that next parade on Biscayne, I don't want to hear about it from anybody up at ESPN.
Just make sure everyone wears their mask.
There will only be an asterisk. There will only be an asterisk if the Heat win the title. Then there's going to be an eternal asterisk, and then we can have Ron DeSantis spreading his arms out, saying "How you like me now?" on the lead float, and anybody else who's run into a Walmart refusing to wear their mask. Mark, we appreciated it. It's funny, as we were closing this episode, I decided real quick just to check my Twitter DMs, and it's not a good thing. And I checked it, and it's, why haven't you spoken out about Deshaun Jackson yet? I'm like, okay, I didn't know now that's my role. But I don't agree. I don't agree with Deshaun Jackson. If anybody needs to know. All right, thanks again, Mark.
And I would second that too. I don't agree with it either.
Yeah, well,
not one bit.
I would just say never quote Hitler. It just does not go well.
It doesn't.
No.
It's just a rule I have. Personally.
Always check your source, man, or write it yourself. Say it in your own words if you're not sure. That was a bad miss.
Yeah, that was a bad miss. I will say that if I have to say it publicly, I hold a press conference outside my condo. I'll do that. Mark Jones, ESPN on Twitter. Only send him nice things so he doesn't have to block you. Mark, we really appreciate the time.
Guys, it was my pleasure. Let's do it again soon, okay?
Absolutely. Be safe.
From inside the bubble, maybe. From inside, I'm doing tier 2. So I'll be up there, but I'm not gonna. I can't stay there for as long. So I'm gonna. I will run into you, but I'll just wave from behind a mask. That's okay. Ethan, I'll see if I can get a magic ring for your daughter. For your princess,
I appreciate that. Yeah. Make Elsa appear.
Okay, guys.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
See you later.
Okay, I want to thank Mark Jones for joining us. Really enjoyed that. Again, follow him at Mark Jones, ESPN. We got a little bit more for you on this episode. We're going to get into some of the things that happened related to the Miami Heat today. But before we do, I want to tell you about not just a sponsor we have, but this incredible promotion that we've got going on. And this involves not just 5 on the Floor, but also 2 of the other properties of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, 3 yards per carry on the Dolphins and NFL, and also 5 Rings Canes, hosted by Alex Dono and Larry Bluestein and Josh Darrow on the Miami Hurricanes and college football. And this one is tied to You Break Wheel Fix. You've heard a lot about them here on 5 on the Floor. It's located just south of Aventura in North Miami, and they got 15 years experience in wheel repair and refinishing, repairing cracked, bent, curved, and damaged wheels, and also refinishing and powder coating back to factory specifications, along with over 5,000 available custom colors, including Vice colors. But one of the reasons I want to tell you about this is we've got this deal going on, and you break Wheel Fix. Mark is offering a $600 value of free powder coating on a set of 4 wheels. Now, it doesn't include the standard finishes, and the custom colors are not included in this particular giveaway, but still it's a $600 value. And here's what you need to do. I'm going to give you the first name of a Heat player today. Actually, Alex is going to give it. He's just going to give you the first name of a Heat player in a second. On 3 yards per carry and on 5 rings canes, they've already done this. They've given the first names of a Hurricane and the first name of a Dolphin player. When you have all 3, which means you got to listen to the last episode of 5 rings canes, you got to listen to the last episode of 3 yards per carry, and then you got this episode. When you have all 3, send them to the @5reasonsports account on Twitter, and you're going to get this $600 value, okay? Alex, give me a first name of a Heat player. Duncan. All right. So that is our submission. There's one from the Hurricanes, and there's one. I knew you were going to pick that one. I don't know why. There's one for the. There's one. I was wondering if you could pick Edris for Bam Adebayo, but no, we're going with Duncan, and you didn't go with his middle name either. Which look up his middle name. We got one from the Hurricanes. We got one from 3 yards per carry and the Dolphins. So listen to the last episodes from those pods. But the name here is Duncan. And now let's get to.
His middle name is McBird?
You didn't know that?
Hold on.
McBride. It's like the whitest possible middle name you could find, and yet his nickname is Debo.
That at least there's some white names that are kind of corny. No, McBride is just straight up cool, and to have it as your middle name, that's awesome.
McBride.
Wow, just from that, I would have told you this guy would have been one of the greatest shooters in league history.
All right, let's get to the Heat news here real quick. First thing I'm going to cover real quick. The Heat went up to Orlando this afternoon around 4:30. Some of the players, Myers Leonard, Kelly Olynyk, signaled this on their social media platforms. The Heat sent out some photos of some of the players getting on board. I'm going to let you look them up. The reason I'm going to do that is I don't want to play this guessing game about the 2 players who were not on the trip. I reported the day before that Derrick Jones Jr. was making the trip. He did make the trip. But the 2 players who tested positive for COVID-19 that I have not revealed, I think others kind of took my lead, didn't reveal them either. I'm not going to accidentally reveal them by telling you everybody that the Heat put in photos, because they got dangerously close to eliminating pretty much everybody but 2 players on the team. So you guys can find out. Whoever wants to report that can report that. But real quick here, Alex, let's get to the other news of the day. We did a podcast, an episode on Victor Oladipo, Bradley Beal, and Donovan Mitchell, but that's before there was actual news. What was the news today related to Oladipo?
Well, I don't know about news today, but there's been a lot of talk recently coming from Pacers media. They seem a little bit shaky at the moment, and David Ramil said on the Heat Beat podcast a year ago, I believe, that he feels positive that the Pacers are feeling kind of weird about their relationship with Oladipo, and that he said on the podcast that they were worried about the Miami Heat and him wanting to go over there. So I'm sure if they have that on their head, I'm sure it's not for nothing, Ethan. But what I will say is that recently, there's been Pacers media kind of saying, read between the lines. There's stuff going on with the extension. There was reportedly an $80 million 4-year extension offered, and that was the end of that. He probably thought he deserved more as their best player. And, yeah, there's a few different reporters that are kind of, hinting at something. I don't know what that could be.
Well, I'll tell you this. I've known J. Michael a long time. He covered the Wizards for a while. He's not the kind of guy to just throw bombs out there for attention. So he does know something. And I think the key difference here between Oladipo and Beal, other than their contract situations, is that the reporters who cover the Wizards, like Candace Buckner, who I've had on 5 on the Floor, have been very confident all along that Bradley Beal wanted to stay in Washington. that confidence is not coming from the reporters in Indiana.
Oh, that's true. That's a great point, honestly.
Very, very, very different, right? And I will tell you, from having been a beat writer for a long time, the beat writers know. They know. They talk to people around the star, because the star player is, when you're a beat guy, the star player, or a beat woman, as Candace is, the star player is your primary responsibility. Okay. And you have to know not just the player, but you got to know everyone around them, their agent, their marketing people, their trainers, their business associates, everyone. And so, I mean, I covered Dwayne Wade. I knew everyone around him. LeBron, everyone around him. Chris Bosh, started to get to know everyone around him. You have to do that. And so when you get a vibe, it's more than a vibe. Usually when reporters are saying something, they know more than they're saying, because they don't want to give away certain sources close to the player. So if J. Michael, someone who's very careful about this stuff, is insinuating that Oladipo may not want to be in Indiana, and you already have David Ramil and others who've said this, I believe it. And so the only question becomes, Alex, and we'll cover this in more depth in another episode, the only question becomes, do you wait? And do you decide this is the guy? Because then you're saying Bradley Beal's not the guy. And is this the guy that you're going to go after? Is he worth it? Is he healthy enough? And do you try to give up assets now, or, after the season, or do you just wait for 2021? So, I'll give you 30 seconds to finish, because we got to get out today. But I think that's an episode we need to have soon.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. It's really, honestly, it's a tough question. It's good that they have the choice, right? Where essentially they've got three guys who might potentially be interested, all at the same position, and they might have the luxury of choice of waiting. But yeah, J. Michael's over here. I'm looking at his Twitter right now. He said, I'll save that for another time. He's kind of replying to other people's tweets. He said to read between the line after he tweeted, that the coaches and everybody else found out about Oladipo's decision to not play, and that it was his call. They all found out at the same time. I don't know. It seems like that's the one that's building up the most. So that might be the most prominent, most relevant one in the near future.
And the other part,
what he looks like.
And the other part of that,
part to me.
Well, first again, relationship with Dwayne, lives down here, relationship with Jimmy,
and with that what's the name of the gym there?
Design
District. DMC.
Yes. No, David Alexander's gym.
Yes, that one.
Yeah. So David Alexander's gym, and then also like the relationships he's got the Tom Crean connection with Dwayne, which is very strong, and he has the connection with Jimmy, and I mean, there's all the photos of Jimmy and him hugging. And he's not playing he's going with the Pacers, but he's not playing. And, Nate McMillan said he found out not from Vic. So you start to add that stuff together, and a very, in my view, responsible beat writer who is insinuating this kind of stuff on social media, this is where, Pat starts rubbing his hands together. So I think there's something to it. We'll talk about it more. Again, want to thank Mark Jones for joining today. Alex and I will do longer episodes here going forward. Thanks to Alf for being part of it today with me. Wheelfix.com. The name here on 5 on the Floor is Duncan. And, of course, get your Biscayne Bay Brewing. By the way, Alex, today, in between these two parts that we recorded, I brought a 6-pack to Alf because he lives close where I had to pick up my daughter. So he's already enjoyed the 6-pack. So as soon as you move to Broward, I've got a case.
Man? I might need to, just make up a reason to go over there.
It's fine. I'm here through Saturday. All right, everybody have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the 5 on the Floor on the 5 Regional Sports Network.